Hello guys, Charles here and welcome back to my channel. So today I just want to take a question that I've been asked here by Pranav PHX. Thanks for your question, Pranav. Asking if you can do a video on how to achieve a good tone, especially legato tone, it would be great. So thanks for your question there, Pranav. Now, I thought I would broaden this question out to just my sort of general thoughts on any technique, really. So I should say up front that I'm certainly no Rick Graham or Marshall Harrison. However, I do have a technique that I'm very happy with. I can play any lead line stuff that I want to play. I do, as you've seen on this channel, I do quite a bit of saxophone transcription work, and I've always got some technique that I can make work and to achieve the result I'm after. However, like I say, take my advice with a pinch of salt because I'm certainly no technique master when it comes to alternate picking or even the legato stuff. I've got my own way of doing the legato, which is the technique you specifically asked about, Pranav. But of course, guys like Tom Quayle do it very differently. Guys like Brett Garced do it different to the way Tom does, differently to the way Alan did it. All of these techniques, they are personal. And really, I think actually the point of this video is just, find your own way to do it. However, I thought I would give you my tips and advice for working on any technique as I see them today. Although, as with anything, my opinions are constantly changing on these subjects. But if you came for a lesson with me today, this is the sort of thing I might suggest. So I've identified three pretty common problems that I certainly struggled with when I was really technique focused, especially as a teenager. I went through my sort of Steve Vai, Yngwie phase, and I was absolutely obsessed with technique, John Petrucci as well. So the first problem that we see a lot is whittling with no accuracy. So it's quite easy to get to a point, really within a few years of playing the instrument, where you can play fast. However, a lot of the time we're just kind of wobbling our left-hand fingers around on the fretboard or on the piano. It doesn't really matter what instrument you're playing. You need to know what notes you're trying to play, especially the subdivisions themselves. You need to know what am I trying to divide this beat into? Is this a semi-quavers, or is this quavers, or is it triplets, or what am I trying to achieve here? The most important thing, no matter how you divide a beat, is where the phrase is going and to really focus on the note that follows your lick, the landing note, and really hit that dead on. As we know, we can divide a beat into pretty much anything. We can go 3s, 5s, 7s, 13s. There's a lot of 13s in Coltrane transcriptions. It doesn't really matter how you divide the beat itself, but if the next thing doesn't land perfectly wherever it's supposed to, normally on the beat of course, it's all for nothing, it's all in vain. The second problem is learning full licks or full runs from our favourite players. The issue here is I can think of quite a few runs that I've learned in the past. For the Love of God, I remember that was one of the first runs that I really learned just before Steve goes back into that final chorus. After the showy offy bit, there's that some slash runs. There's a great run in Night Train, Sweet Child of Mine, of course. The issue here is twofold. One is if I was to play one of those phrases, it's too identifiable. That's Steve's run or that's Slash's run. It's too obvious. I've learned some Holdsworth lines. They're probably even more noticeably Holdsworth. The second issue is if those lines move through changes, then of course you can only really apply them where you have similar changes or substitutions of those changes. So it's really quite hard to learn a lick and then actually benefit from that. So the secret here is to break that phrase down into smaller chunks. Try changing the rhythms of the phrase. Maybe if it's in 16th notes, you might try breaking it into triplet chunks and try playing those as triplets. But the idea here is you pinch those ideas and you make them your own in your own lines. The third issue is metronome work. Now, guitarists are kind of split into two camps. You get the guys who are very metronome focused. They are very strict and disciplined. And they say that's the only way to do it. Then you get the other camp of equally skilled technicians who are a bit more reluctant or say, they did a bit of metronome work, but less of it. So guys in that camp would be guys like Guthrie, Eric Johnson and Yngwie. They're sort of the three people who spring to mind, where I've never really seen any of them talking in great detail about you've got to do this strict metronome work. It's more about including the ideas in your playing and just using them loads. So the problem with metronome work for most of us is it's just dull, it's boring. And if you are the type of person who can do that, then it's a brilliant approach. But for most of us, I think actually the more fun and consistent approach, because I think most of us have probably done, a week or two's metronome work, but keeping it going for a year or two, which is, I suppose, what you really need to start getting up to those ridiculously high speeds. For me, at least, it's just impractical. I've never been able to stick with it. So it's best to develop your chops by playing and actually using them. Just before I give you a method, I just want to think about some of the slightly wider points, things that we often overlook. The first of which is, remember that the guys we see on YouTube, these guys, they're like the elite level. They're the Usain Bolts of the guitar playing world. Try your best not to compare yourself to those guys. Like I said at the beginning, find your own way of doing these things. To achieve that kind of level of elite technique, you either have to be an incredibly disciplined genetic freak, like Tom Quayle. His left hand, the guy's just a freak. Holdsworth, total freak. How can you do that? Or you've got to be 10 times more disciplined than those guys are without that natural talent. Now, regardless of whether you've got a natural inclination towards this stuff or not, you have to work ridiculously hard. And it's about asking, what do you really want to achieve? Are you willing to put that work in, or are there other areas of your playing you'd like to invest that time in instead? Second wider point is regarding speed. Longer lines are going to have to be slower than medium length lines, which are going to have to be slightly slower than small chunks. There's an endurance factor going on here. So if you want to play for 3 minutes of legato consistently, it's going to have to be a lot slower than you would play 1 bar of legato. So work on getting smaller cells ridiculously fast so that your longer lines can still be a considerable tempo. So let's say you want to play, a long run at 170 BPM. Well, you've got to make sure you can do each of the smaller chunks of that run at, 200 BPM, 210 BPM, much faster, so that you've then got control over that longer line at a slower tempo. So let's talk about Guthrie again. He's considered to be one of the best technicians out there. Actually, Guthrie doesn't perform anywhere near the limit of human potential. When we hear Guthrie's really fast, intricate lines, they're of course very fast and very impressive, but they're nothing speed-wise compared to someone like Roy Marchbank, who's a really musical player, with sort of next level Sean Lane times 10 chops. Now, that's not that Roy's better than Guthrie or anything like that. It's just to be aware that although Guthrie's lines are incredibly impressive and incredibly fast, they are well under the human limit. He's got a threshold, a headroom there to deal with. And so make sure that, you're not playing right on your personal limit. Otherwise, you lose that sense of control. And the third wider point here is you need to choose what you're aiming for and what sort of end point you're going to be happy with. Studying technique for the sake of technique is mostly lacking, but choose a technical goal which, if you were to achieve, you would really feel like your technical craving, which we all have, we all want to play fast on the guitar, but you'll feel that craving has been satisfied. So it might be learning an Eric Johnson lick, or it might be learning something by Petrucci or some Yngwie sweeping, but choose something that you feel is achievable, but a real challenge, at which point you think, if I could do that, then I'll be happy. Now, of course, the danger here is as soon as you can do that, you then set yourself a new goal, which is just the way that we keep improving. But decide what it is you want to achieve, and then you want to take a slightly different approach to the metronome approach, in my opinion. The issue is there's no quick results here. So consider, whatever your goal is, consider spending the next 4 years trying to achieve that goal rather than the next 4 weeks. Is it worth it? Choose something that you would be willing to commit 4 years of your life to rather than just 4 weeks. And then this is the method I would recommend taking to get there. So the first thing you want to consider is whichever technique you're trying to develop, whether it's picking or legato or tapping or whatever it is, look into what the common difficulties, challenges and pitfalls of that technique are. So my two main techniques are alternate picking and legato, both of which the challenge is moving across the string, moving from one string to another. Most of us can tremolo pick quite fast on a single string. Most of us can move our fingers up and down on a single string, but doing so nicely, moving to a new string, is the challenge. So make sure that you've got the basics of the technique down and you are moving efficiently and effectively, and then stop looking for shortcuts. Spend all the time you would be looking into researching that one secret trick the pros don't want you to know about. Use that research time instead to actually work on the technique. I have wasted months and probably years of my life looking for secrets. I still find myself looking for shortcuts and secrets now that simply don't exist. So don't waste your time doing it. If you've got time to waste watching an hour-long YouTube video on, I promise I'll give you this secret, then you've got an hour to practice working towards your goal. So let's say that your end goal is a 4-bar run of 16th notes. Now, because we know that laying down a really strong foundation is the most important thing, and we've decided we're going to spend 4 years working on this challenge, we might think, oh, well, I'll do a bar a year. But no, we're going to make it even easier than that. We're going to do a beat for year 1. You're going to spend a year thinking about how many different ways you can subdivide a beat and how many different ways you can move that around on the guitar. You're going to tackle that basic foundational chunk of material for an entire year. So for the rest of the year, you're going to be using, in all of your improvising, you're going to be putting in these wonderful little bursts of one beat's speed of whatever your chosen technique is, if it's picking or legato. And you're going to make sure that any new musical vocabulary you work on creating over the next year, you try, where tasteful, to put in these bursts of speed. These bursts of speed should tackle the technical challenges head on. So if you know that changing string is the most difficult thing, then that burst should include a string change. So after a year of working on extreme speed, beautifully performed legato with perfect subdivisions of time, you've worked on triplets paired with duplets and duplets paired with triplets and quintuplets and sextuplets. You worked on all these possible combinations. You've pinched single beats from your favorite players. You've broken down their lines and mastered those movements. Year 2, you're now going to work on 2-beat chunks, and you're going to do exactly the same thing. How many beautiful 2-beat cells can you create in the course of a year? So by year 3, you're probably looking at full bars of vocabulary. You're trying to come up with really nice 16th note runs, 16th notes with triplets in there, sextuplets, quintuplets, all these different possibilities, really, really working on targeting the difficulty of that technique as beautifully as possible. And by the time you've got 1 bar down, the ball's really rolling now, you've got all the mechanics of the movement down, you'll be up to your goal of 2, 3, 4 bars over the final year in no time at all. Once that hard, heavy lifting's happened at the beginning, the rest of it's just plain sailing. So in only 4 years, you've developed the technique that you were after by plugging away chunk by chunk, really mastering every possible variation. And by 4 years' time, you have completely internalized that technique and understood that technique far beyond what I feel you would have done by just learning long phrases. So just to put a subtle plug in here, if you've made it this far in the video, well done. This approach is kind of the way my legato book, which you've seen advertised on my previous videos, I break it down by just showing you some of the different ways you can apply the technique, different cells and movements, finger combinations. And the point of my book is that by the end, you can then work on developing your own. It's the kind of give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach him how to fish, feed him for a lifetime approach, where I'm showing you the basic mechanics of the movement, and the idea is you go away and really internalize these again, maybe even over a 4-year period. So that's the approach that I would recommend you take. 4 years in the grand scheme of things is nothing. 4 years was completely arbitrary number, but you break whatever your goal is down into what seems to make sense, but a far longer amount of time than you probably think you need to do. And the most important thing is working on very, very small chunks of extreme speed, extreme accuracy, and lovely evenness of tone. However, there's another approach which I personally found very useful. Although I wouldn't recommend this one, I think I should share it with you because, like I say, I did use this one a lot myself and I found a great deal of benefit when I was quite heavily focusing on my technique, probably 8 years ago or something like that, when I was really quite focused on legato playing in particular. So what I would do is any technique I was wanting to develop, I would practice scales with that technique over the top of single key top 40 songs. So I would put a top 40 playlist on, and for every new song that came on in that playlist, I'd immediately figure out what key it was in. And then I would find which subdivision started to feel like a bit of a challenge. So I would just try playing scales in quavers, and if that was easy, I'd move into triplets. At that point, if I started to feel all triplets, they're kind of working my hand a little bit. I can't keep those notes even. It doesn't sound as good as I would like, or I'm string changing and that first finger note isn't coming out evenly. Then I would just play over the whole song, 3-4 minutes, however long a pop song is, and only use that technique. So the problem with this approach, in hindsight, is it is pretty mindless. It was the sort of thing where I would just put on and let my hand do all the work. It also doesn't really breed the most interesting vocabulary. It's kind of quite scalular, whereas the previous approach, like I say, your goal was to actually create your own interesting vocabulary and figure out how many different combinations you can come through. If you're just playing constantly for 4 minutes, it's harder to take the time to do that. However, I wouldn't dismiss this approach at all because it was very good for me taking it up a notch. But I do wish I had been more musical in my approach in doing this. So if you can think of a way to combine the two approaches, that might be great for you to start to blend into longer runs rather than just focusing on single bursts. So if that sounds like a better approach for you, then give it a go. Resist the temptation to play faster than you actually can, and probably err on the side of caution so that you can really focus on that evenness of tone, relaxing your left hand, hammers on only, all these techniques that we talk about in legato work, and make sure that you're freeing up a bit more of your CPU rather than working right on the edge of your seat, so you don't really have time to listen to what you're doing and think, does this actually sound any good or not? Am I actually achieving a musical result here rather than just a technical one? So hopefully you found something useful there. I think the most important thing is whichever technique you want to improve, you use it consistently and as well as possible, even if that means going at very slow speeds over the long run. And as you work on those tiny cells, it grows into something bigger. It snowballs over the years, not the weeks and months. Remember, it's always better to use one short, well-executed burst of notes than it is to use one long line of drivel. I wish someone had told me that when I was 15. Focus on quality, not quantity, I suppose, is what it boils down to. Rhythmic accuracy, landing on the following target note, relaxation, efficiency, evenness of tone. These are all things which you should be constantly focusing on for the rest of your life. And these are the things that the top players are always talking about in their own practice. No matter what level these guys have got to, they're still working on those basic essentials. Let's discuss your ideas on technical development down in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts and approaches to developing a better foundational technique. Please do give this video a like, subscribe, ding that notification bell, and share with any of your friends who are metronome worshippers and can maybe try a different approach. And as always, I hope you're all doing very well, getting plenty of practice in, and I very much look forward to seeing you in the next one. Cheers.
Roll up, let me embed a story you'll never forget. A drip, drip, you're drowning in debt now. You can't buy your way out, and I heard you find it difficult to cope.